Welcome to Tuesday's edition of COVID-19. We begin with a decline in the daily tally today for the first time in about a week, but authorities remain concerned amid the presence of cluster infections across the nation. Now, we have more on this reality as well as on efforts to promote diplomatic agendas this year later on in the program. Here first is our Consoa with the broader pandemic coverage. Now, Soa, do start us off then.
Sure, Sunny. We're seeing quite a drop in cases compared to yesterday, with almost 70 fewer cases than Monday. That's 346 infections and includes 331 domestic cases and 15 infections from abroad. Now, for the first time in a week, the country is seeing cases below 400. And with that, the number is pretty similar to the one we had last Tuesday. And if we move over to our map now, there is also a positive development in the capital, Seoul, which today reported less than 100 infections, but still triple digits in Gyeonggi-do province. And apart from the metropolitan region, the place with the highest number of infections is here, Gyeongsangnam-do province, with 29 new infections. And with that, Korea has a total of 99,421 infections and 7 additional COVID-19 related fatalities. Let's also get an update on the vaccinations completed here in the nation. We've got a total of 680,560 people who have received their first shot of vaccinations, with some 2,700 completed on Monday. And this is the number of people who already got their second dose of vaccination, which would be the Pfizer shot, of course. Now, this Tuesday, the vaccination program for seniors aged 65 and above has begun, as you can see, including President Moon Jae-in, who received his shot this morning, and that following a delay in AstraZeneca inoculations for this group after earlier concerns over safety and effectiveness due to lack of data. But our Ji-young will have more updates on the domestic vaccine front in a bit. But meanwhile, World Health Organization Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus criticized the gap of vaccination distribution among poor and rich countries, claiming that AstraZeneca to be the only company that's not committed to profiting from its product during the pandemic. Here's what he said.
So far, it's the only vaccine developer that has made a significant contribution to vaccine equity by licensing its technology to several other companies, including SK Bio in the Republic of Korea and the Serum Institute of India, which are producing more than 90% of the vaccines that have so far been distributed through COVAX.
I see. Meanwhile, Soa, despite the progress on the vaccination front, caseloads across the world are rebounding, and so is the number of fatalities, I hear.
Right, Sunny. And this also coming from a WHO expert who said global COVID-19 related fatalities have risen for the first time in 6 weeks, and that on the back of an increase of infections for 5 straight weeks. So this expert called this a worrying sign, and also because there's been an 8% increase in infections in the past week. So with that, the world now has a total of almost 124.3 million infections and 2.7 million fatalities, but also more than 100 million recoveries so far. If we take a closer look, as I mentioned, there was an 8% on-week increase in the past week, but for European countries like here, France and Germany, there has been a 12% increase in that continent. And meanwhile, Brazil has hit 12 million cases in total, with Brazil and the US still seeing over 50,000 daily infections. And those are the updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit after the government briefing. Sunny?
All right, Soa, thank you for that. Right, back on the local front, a panel of Korean health experts has recommended the continued use of AstraZeneca's vaccine. And for more on this recommendation, I have our Ji-young here in the studio. Welcome, Ji-young.
Hi, Sunny.
Right, Ji-young, do start with what local experts had to say about the safety of AstraZeneca's vaccine.
Sure, Sunny. The South Korean government has decided to continue using the AstraZeneca vaccine, which they deem to be safe. The government's decision reflected the view of its advisory panel, which had launched an investigation to determine if there were any links between the vaccine and cases of of post-inoculation blood clots. The committee concluded that the formation of blood clots is not associated in any way with AstraZeneca vaccines. The chair of the committee said they share the views of the World Health Organization and European Medicines Agency that as long as COVID-19 poses a public health threat, the rollout of AstraZeneca vaccines should continue. Take a listen.
Clinical trials and real-world observations on the medical front have shown AstraZeneca vaccines to be safe and effective at lowering the rate of serious illnesses and deaths. The benefits of getting vaccinated greatly outweigh the risk of side effects.
She also said that blood clotting disorders, including deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism, are relatively common symptoms that can be attributed to a variety of causes aside from COVID-19.
Out of the 20 million people who have been vaccinated in the UK and Europe, there have been 7 cases of blood clotting throughout the whole body and 18 cases of blood clots in the brain. They are extremely rare incidents that occurred at a rate of 1 out of a million inoculations with no established links between them and the vaccines.
However, health authorities did say causal links were found between the vaccines and 2 cases of severe adverse reactions in particular.
We examined 10 reported cases of suspected adverse effects, including anaphylaxis. Clinical symptoms similar to anaphylaxis, 10 minutes post-inoculation, were seen in one of these cases. And there was also another case involving high fever and convulsion on the day of the vaccination, followed by low blood pressure on the day after. A causal link has been established between these 2 specific cases and the vaccines.
But she added that in both cases, the health condition of the patient had improved and there were no links between the vaccines and any of the post-inoculation deaths.
I see. Well, that's good to know. Meanwhile, Chiang, also in a visible vote of confidence in AstraZeneca's vaccine, the President, Moon Jae-in, as Soa mentioned earlier, and the First Lady received their first shots this morning.
Right. President Moon and First Lady Kim received their first doses of AstraZeneca vaccines at around 9 a.m. today. On the first day, it became available for his age group of those 65 and older. President Moon is 68 years old and Kim is 66. They're receiving their 2 doses of AstraZeneca's vaccines ahead of their planned trip to the UK in June for the G7 summit. In a meeting with his aides on Monday, President Moon addressed public concerns about the vaccine's safety and efficacy. He reassured the nation's people that the vaccines have been deemed to be safe worldwide, with many European countries having resumed their rollout of the vaccine.
국민들께서도 백신의 안전성에 조금도 의심을 품지 마시고 접종 순서가 되는 대로 접종에 응해 주시기 바랍니다.
He also asked citizens to cooperate in speeding up the country's inoculation drive with the goal of vaccinating more than 12 million people in the first half of the year.
Right. Chiang, tell us a bit more about the people on that list of those aged 65 and above who are eligible for AstraZeneca vaccines.
Yes, Sunny. Those first in line are residents and staff at care centers and hospitals who are 65 and older. Some 376,000 residents and staff at those facilities are eligible to receive their shots. And among them, more than 3/4, or about 288,000 people at some 1,650 care hospitals and more than 4,000 care centers nationwide said they're willing to get their vaccines. The vaccination drive started today at nursing hospitals and will start on the 30th at nursing homes. The AstraZeneca vaccines will be delivered to nursing hospitals in batches over the course of 3 days from Monday to Wednesday. At nursing hospitals, recipients will get the vaccine after a medical check-up by a doctor, and nursing homes, where there are usually no doctors, health authorities will dispatch vaccination personnel to help out with the inoculations. In some cases, however, those eligible will have to visit a local health clinic in person to get their shots.
All right, Chiang, thank you very much for that coverage.
Thank you for having me.
Right, up next, we're poised to join the regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea.
9,421명입니다. and a total of 79,747 tests were conducted yesterday. And among them, at the makeshift testing centers in the metropolitan area, we carried out 34,721 tests and confirming 37 patients with COVID-19. And also, we have 468 more people making their full recovery and being discharged, while 6,638 still remain in quarantine. And there are a total of 101 patients with critical or severe conditions, down by 2 from the day before, and we had 7 additional fatalities. I extend my deepest condolences to the deceased and the members of the bereaved families. Here are some updates on our domestic infections by region in the metropolitan area. In Seoul, Junggu district, in relation to a pub and restaurant, we have 9 additional cases, raising the total to 30. And in Seoul, Songpa-gu district, in relation to a church, we have 5 additional cases, raising the total to 17. And regarding a family, second family gathering in Gimpo City, Gyeonggi-do Province, we also identified 9 additional patients, and a total of 10 have been confirmed to date. And in Gyeonggi-do Province, Yongin City, in relation to a university, we identified the first index case on the 18th, and we have 11 more patients being confirmed, and a total of 12 have been confirmed to date. And moving on to Chungcheong provinces. In Chungnam province, in relation to a church in Seosan City, we identified the first index case on the 19th, and we have 7 more cases being confirmed, and a total of 8 have been confirmed to date. And in Honam area, in Jeonju City, in relation to an agriculture machine business, we identified the first index case on the 18th. We have 6 additional patients, raising the total to 18 to date. And moving on to Gyeongsangbuk-do Province. In Gyeongsangbuk-do Province, Gyeongsan City, in relation to a spa, we also identified additional cases of 13, and a total of 14 have been confirmed to date. And in Gyeongsangnam-do Province, in Jinju City, in relation to a second public bathhouse, we have been doing our investigation. We have identified 14 additional patients, and a total of 220 have been confirmed to date. And in Gyeongnam Province, Geoje City, in relation to a business, there we have also 8 additional patients being confirmed, and raising the total to 87. And in relation to Ulsan City, Bukgu District, in relation to a sauna, we also have additional cases being confirmed there as well. And we also have been analyzing the infections among children and teenagers, and here are some updates. And we have been looking at the people aged between 3 and 18, and we have been looking at about 690 cases, which is about 10% of the total COVID-19 cases here in South Korea. And at primary schools, we did not have cluster infections after the beginning of our school year, and we have seen many of these cases being related to individual cluster infections. However, we are seeing cluster infections at preschools, nursing homes, as well as nursing daycare centers, that is, and as well as academies. And moreover, we have also seen cluster infections stemming from soccer clubs. And as for preschools, we have seen that they had cluster infections breaking out, which also had local transmissions into other facilities like academies and other preschools nearby. And in relation to preschools as well as kindergarten and primary school teachers and faculty members, we ask you to continue to monitor your health conditions. And if you have any symptoms, and if any students have any symptoms, it is very important to encourage them to get tested and also ventilate and disinfect the space on a regular basis. And we also ask parents to also get tested as soon as possible if they have symptoms. Moreover, we have seen at the multi-use facilities, whether they are indoor or outdoor, if it's crowded, you need to always wear a face mask, and this means that you need to also wear your face mask when you are at private academies as well. And next, we have some updates on the COVID-19 vaccination here in the country. As of March 23rd at midnight, 2,704 more people have been administered with the first dose of COVID-19 vaccine nationwide, with the total now standing at 680,560. We have seen the target rate reaching at about 86.4%. And we also see at care facilities more than 97,000 have been vaccinated, and also about 56 first responders have been vaccinated as well. And also we have quite a number of people being administered with the vaccination at the COVID-19 hospitals and general hospitals. And at the COVID-19 hospitals, we have seen about 58,000 of them having the first dose of the vaccines, and about 800 of them also received their second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. And we have a total of 9,804 cases of post-inoculation adverse responses, with 101 of them being new cases. And we see a major of them, 9,692, were involving mild or common symptoms that were involved in post-inoculation responses, including muscle pain and so forth. We have a total of 89 suspected cases of anaphylaxis and 16 cases of death, which are under investigation. And globally, we have seen a stagnant case in the number of COVID-19 caseload starting from January. However, aside from Africa, all of the continents are witnessing another surge for the past 4 weeks. And at a time when we do not have a full, a majority of our people getting vaccinated, that is, we believe that these are the risk factors of the infections that are also spreading. And also here in South Korea, we are seeing our daily tally hovering around 300 to 400, and we are not yet seeing a containment of the spread of the virus. And we also have many risks that are involved in our day-to-day venues, and we believe that at any time we could also have a possible large cluster infection. And we have seen lately, we have seen an increase of foot traffic among people, and also we are seeing more people not complying with the hand washing rules. And we are mostly concerned about such a complacency among the public. Before we reach herd immunity through vaccination, it is very important that we continue to have consistency in carrying out these quarantine measures. So we highlight this once again. The COVID-19 symptoms, we cannot say that they are particular. If you have any symptoms like sore throat or coughing or other respiratory symptoms, or if you also have a loss of taste or a scent, we also ask you to refrain from going to multi-use facilities and also going to crowded spaces. Rather, you need to also get tested as soon as possible for the sake of your health and those around you. And before you get the test results, please do not come into contact with any other people. By securing this and by complying with such a strategy, we believe that we can largely contain the spread of the virus. We have seen many cluster infections that have involved people spreading the virus, especially first stemming from people who had original symptoms. And we also have seen family cluster infections, which have also been spotted lately for the past 4 weeks or so. We have seen that 31.7% were individual infections, and among them, 50% were family gatherings, and also 10% were involving families and acquaintances, and about 8% were related to workspaces. And a majority of them were family transmissions, meaning that the elderly spread the virus to those younger people. And we have seen those in the 40s and 30s and 40s. They transmitted the virus to those under the age of 16, and we also seen a majority of the cases being this case, and only 2.9% of the cases were the vice versa. And considering our demographics, we believe that we have a high number and high rate of a proportion of the infections spreading from parents to their children. And we ask the parents to also take particular caution. You need to wash your hands on a regular basis after returning home. And if anyone is showing symptoms within your family, please encourage this person to get tested as soon as possible. And even during inside the household, you need to also wear face mask and keep social distancing before you have the results. And starting from today, we will begin the rollout of the vaccinations to seniors over the age of 65 at nursing hospitals, and the 30th will be the rollout date for nursing homes. And also, we need to note that AstraZeneca vaccine, we had a massive clinical trial that were carried out in the U.S. involving over 32,000 subjects, and they had an efficacy rate of over 79%. And the WHO also notes that there is no correlation between the latest blood clots and the vaccination. And also, it also noted that the the vaccination can also reduce the severity of the symptoms. And we need to also note that the vaccination is a crucial step and an essential step for us to reach herd immunity. And vaccination, not only based on its medical evidence, but also is based on the evidence of health. And in this first pandemic in some century, we have also successfully developed the COVID-19 vaccines on a global front. And it is also the scientists and the experts who, with much of them saying that the vaccination is safe to be received. And also, there are many rumors, on the other hand, that are based on misinformation or with no grounds of science evidence. And please note that they can hinder our efforts in containing the virus. And the quarantine efforts here in South Korea, we will also exert our full efforts to contain the virus and carry out our inoculation as planned. Thank you very much.
Right, there was Lee Sang-won with Tuesday's afternoon briefing. So what did he have to say?
Well, he had some comments regarding children and teenagers that have been infected with COVID-19 this year so far. That's 61 cases in total, which is some 10.7% of the total number of infections. And in many cases, these infections did not happen at schools, but rather at after-school activities, such as at soccer club or at dormitories. And in such cases, there appeared to happen chain transmissions from these students to preschools, to family members, as well as to cram schools. And also, when it comes to infections among family members, he mentioned that out of recent infections, 31% were transmissions between individuals, and out of those, around half were happened among family members. And the interesting fact here is that the percentage of parents transmitting the infection to their children was much higher than children to their parents. So this is why he stressed that people in their 30s or 40s should also be extra careful after work and when they're at home. And last but not least, he also asked for cooperation on the vaccination front, especially as the vaccination for seniors aged 65 and above starts today.
Right. Okay, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Right, and so I mentioned it's been less than a month since Korea launched its inoculation drive, and starting today, the elderly, aged 65 and above, are receiving their first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine, while frontline medical workers will receive their second dose of the Pfizer vaccine from this weekend. So how will these efforts pave the path to herd immunity? We answer that question in this report.
Two different vaccines are currently being administered here in Korea, with AstraZeneca shown to have an efficacy rate of 79% and Pfizer with 95% in clinical trials. While the main purpose of a vaccine is to provide immunity against COVID-19, it also comes with other important health benefits. Studies have shown that vaccines also reduce the likelihood of serious illnesses and hospitalizations in the event of an infection.
백신을 맞으면 우리 면역 시스템은 두 가지가 있어요. 항체 면역이 있고 또 하나는 이제 T세포처럼 세포 면역이 있어요. 항체가 잘 안 생긴다 하더라도 T세포 면역이나 기억세포 면역이 남아있기 때문에 이 부분이 걸린다 하더라도 약하게 병을 앓게 하는 그런 역할을 한다고 생각이 됩니다.
Real-world observations in Scotland showed that just a single dose of AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines had lowered the rate of hospitalizations by 94% and 85% respectively.
We've seen very high coverage, particularly in these high-risk groups. They're very elderly people and people with underlying conditions of one kind or another. So far we've been very pleased with the progress. We are seeing a more rapid reduction in elderly people than in younger people, which does point to the fact that the vaccine is contributing to the reduction in cases that we're seeing.
Fewer cases requiring hospitalizations naturally corresponds to fewer fatalities as well. Data in the UK has shown a dramatic fall in the number of elderly deaths from COVID-19 since the start of its public inoculation campaign. A similar phenomenon is also being witnessed in Israel, which is leading the world in COVID-19 vaccinations. Israel has also reported a significant drop in both the number of hospitalizations and deaths, with studies showing a 72% reduction in the fatality rate from the effects of the first dose alone. After reporting more than 100 deaths on January 20th, the number of daily deaths in Israel from COVID-19 is now hovering between the teens and the single digits, thanks to the effects of vaccinations and social distancing.
After the second dose, you are well protected, over 90%. We assume, based on Pfizer trials, that the second dose not only provides better protection, but also a long-lasting protection.
So what can be done to ensure that other countries, including Korea, can also enjoy this full spectrum of benefits offered by the vaccines?
수요는 전 세계적으로 엄청나고 모든 나라들이 백신을 선구매하고 노력하지만 이 백신 생산량이 못 쫓아가니까 물량이 부족하다 보니까 확보가 어려운 상황입니다. 그러니까 이 후반기에도 과연 백신 물량이 충분히 확보돼서 도입이 될 건지가 이제 관건이라고 보고 이건 우리나라만의 문제가 아니고 전 세계적인 문제입니다.
Amid the vaccine shortage, the UK has lengthened the interval between the first and second doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine from the initial 3 to 4 weeks to the current 12 weeks.
By delaying the second dose, that enabled us to give more people a first dose more quickly and get more protection against hospitalization.
Continued research is imperative to make the most out of the limited vaccines we have as we navigate the global supply crunch.
저와 제 아내도 오는 6월 G7 정상회의에 참석하기 위해 내일 아스트라제네카 백신을 맞습니다. 국민들께서도 백신의 안전성에 조금 더 의심을 품지 마시고 접종 순서가 되는 대로 접종에 응해주시기 바랍니다.
한반도의 완전한 비핵화와 항구적 평화를 위해 빈틈없는 공조를 계속할 것입니다.
In the face of today's shifting global dynamics, this alliance is important now more than ever.
The pandemic has challenged diplomatic efforts amid restrictions on gatherings and travel. But the presence of vaccines is now seen to promote global agendas. And for more on these efforts, I have Dr. Woo Chong-yup from Sejong Institute. It's been a while, Dr. Woo.
Thanks for having me.
And joining our session virtually is Rory Daniels at the National Committee on American Foreign Policy over in the US. Pleasure to have you with us, Ms. Daniels.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right then, Dr. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has arrived here in Seoul for talks with his Korean counterpart Jung Eun. Now, this visit follows an earlier call by cabinet-level officials from the US last week. Having said that, what do you suppose is the significance of resumption of face-to-face diplomacy in recent days?
As you just mentioned, that being in somewhere carries the political and diplomatic meanings. So the Russian foreign minister's visit to South Korea just after the visit of Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense of the United States just less than a week ago, that carries a lot of political meaning. So the optic is very important in diplomacy and politics. So as President Moon just got the vaccination today for the purpose of visiting UK for the G7 meeting, that there are a lot of things can be discussed on the surface, but at the same time that a lot of things can be discussed below the surface. So diplomacy is something done between human beings. So it's not only the transactions over the virtual platform, but something that you carries with your face, emotion, and a lot of body languages. That carries a lot of meaning because in diplomacy, there are things that cannot be officially mentioned through your mouth. So I think that is why the face-to-face diplomacy is very important, especially in delicate issues that we have to deal with these days.
I see, and we'll get into that later on. But first, Ms. Daniels-Dunn, do tell us a bit about the Biden administration's foreign policy with regard to Korea.
Well, I think the Biden administration is doing an excellent job fulfilling its campaign promises to pivot from an America first unilateral approach to global affairs to an approach that emphasizes America's longstanding alliances and partnerships in the world. With regard to South Korea, the phone calls that President Biden had with President Moon were among the first round of phone calls that he had with world leaders. And I think that the quick pace of arranging this 2+2 meeting really shows the importance of the South Korean-U.S. alliance to U.S. global interests and U.S. interests in Asia. Signing the special measures agreement so quickly after the Biden administration took office is another important signal that the Biden administration is not interested in a transactional approach to alliances. And I think the joint statement emphasized a lot of global issues that are important to both the U.S. and South Korea, including climate change and international commerce. So I think the signals are good. The steps are promising. However, there are still a lot of issues to work at in the alliance. There's a lot of damage that has been done that needs to be repaired inside the alliance. And there are clearly some differences of emphasis, particularly when it comes to the issue of how to approach denuclearization of North Korea or the Korean Peninsula, language that was used by both sides separately to describe the goals in that process. And there's also an increased emphasis on South Korea-Japan relations. And given the painful history between the two countries, I think that now is the time when the Biden administration has to take this allies and partners strategy and work with some of the very thorny issues within the alliance relationship to translate it into a strategy for peace and stability in the region. And a lot of that work remains to be done.
Right. Doctor, keeping in mind what Ms. Daniels has just said, what can you tell us about last week's high-level talks between Seoul and Washington here in Korea?
So it's very meaningful that within 2 months of launch of its administration, President Biden sent his two most important cabinet members to Tokyo and Seoul to discuss the alliance issues. Very interestingly, that the joint statement after the 2+2 meeting between Korea and the United States, we see some differences, what's included in the joint statement and also what's included in their their speeches for the press and their opening remarks during the meeting. So South Korea want to emphasize more of North Korean policy and cooperation on the North Korean policy between Korea and the United States. And from defense side, we want to discuss more on the transfer of the OPCON back to South Korea and expediting it. But from the U.S. side, they want to emphasize the trilateral security cooperation between Korea, U.S., and Japan vis-a-vis China. And from defense side, they want to discuss more on the readiness of the military forces, combined forces. So they have some different emphasis, but in principle, they agree to restore the alliance back to the normal. So I think from now on, two allies have to spend a lot of time to narrow the differences between two allies, especially on the OPCON transfer and the Korean peace process policy toward North Korea, and also how to narrow the gap between Korea and Japan with regard to the security cooperation. So I think it's a good start.
Right. Now, Ms. Daniels, right after Team Biden's agenda here in this part of the world, North Korea and China reaffirmed their commitment to bilateral ties. What are your thoughts on the timing and perhaps the content of this exchange between Beijing and Pyongyang?
I think both the timing and the content are unsurprising. I think that this was done to demonstrate that the fundamental positions of North Korea and China have not changed despite the pandemic and the slowdown in face-to-face diplomacy, and also the change of administration in the United States. So in terms of content, China reaffirmed that it is seeking and will support a diplomatic solution to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. That's no surprise. China has always preferred diplomacy over other means to resolve the longstanding issues that between the U.S. and North Korea and between South and North. And the North Koreans reaffirmed that they seek a strong and cooperative and productive relationship with China. And North Korea has been very careful in its relationship with China over the past several years, even as it reached out to South Korea and conducted diplomacy with both South Korea and the U.S. and others. It maintained a very strong tie to China. So I think China is saying we still prefer stability over other means of solving this issue. And North Korea is telling the U.S. at a time when U.S.-China relations are quite fragile that, hey, we have options. So I think neither the timing or the content were unsurprising. And I also believe that this will be received in Washington as, again, a demonstration that the fundamental positions haven't changed.
Right. And speaking about demonstration, Dr. Wu, cabinet levels between the U.S. and China in Alaska reported itself to demonstrate their mutual reservations, to say the least. What are your prospects on bilateral ties? That would be ties between the U.S. and China.
The terms that they used to describe the meetings in Anchorage, Alaska last week was unusually undiplomatic. So I think that's the term precisely describe what was going on between two countries. And both United States and China needs to show their people that what's the problem there between two countries. From the U.S. side, they want to show to their people that the differences, the problems existing between two countries are caused by the non-democratic nature of Chinese political system. So because all the problems arose because of Chinese communist controlled governance and its autocracy. So U.S. government wants to need a political support to pursue a policy that is needs to be continued in the future. And from Chinese perspective, that they also need to tell their people that the U.S. is intervening their internal affairs, especially for the Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Xinjiang issues, because Secretary Blinken explicitly mentioned all those issues in his opening remarks, and Chinese Yang Jiechi rebutted. So I think the problem, because the problem is caused by the differences of the nature of their political system, it's going to be very difficult to reconcile the differences between the countries.
Right. And in a separate development, Ms. Daniels, Chinese leader Xi Jinping is expected to visit South Korea once the global pandemic situation is under relative control. What are your thoughts on this upcoming agenda?
I think it would be very significant if Xi Jinping visited South Korea. It would be his probably first foreign trip since the pandemic started. And I think the ROK is a very logical choice for that trip. Of all of China's neighbors, actually, the ROK has had the least amount of tension with China since the pandemic began. And I think the agenda is likely to be very positive and conciliatory. I mean, Xi Jinping does not usually go on foreign trips to lecture or cause problems. And in China, it's very important that the top leader can set the tone for bilateral relations with other countries. So I think that it would probably be a positive trip. The fact is that the U.S. should welcome China's engagement with its neighbors and with U.S. allies, and we have to find a way to do so. Our allies and partners strategy will fail if it requires allies and partners to choose between the U.S. and China. So the geopolitical challenge of our time is really, how do we take these concerns that we have about China, which I think are very serious and very real and very important, but also find ways in which we can all work together on issues of cooperation between our countries, and that both the U.S. and the U.S. in partnership with its allies can approach China from a position of strength in those types of negotiations.
Right. Dr. Wu, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga is poised to meet with U.S. President Joe Biden next month. That would be April. What do you believe would be the implications of this exchange on the broader trilateral relationship among South Korea, Japan, and the U.S.?
As we just discussed, that first destination of the Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin's trip was to Tokyo, and next it was Seoul. I think that carries a lot of meaning for U.S. Foreign policy, because it's going to be first face-to-face summit between the U.S. and Japanese leaders, and there's no one between them. So I think United States wants to send a message to the world that this is where U.S. is heading. By having a Japanese Prime Minister as the first leader that the President Biden is going to meet face-to-face. And in less than 2 months, U.S. government, if you carefully read the documents produced by the U.S. document, we can find some changes in the line. So they emphasize a lot of things on Japan. So for denuclearization policy of the United States, they always emphasize that the United States is going to consult with Japan and South Korea. And even in a Quad statement, they emphasize that Quad countries are going to spend a lot of efforts for denuclearization of North Korea. At the same time, they are going to play a lot of roles in terms of solving the Japanese abduct issues. So for Quad countries, North Korean nuclear problem is at the same level of Japanese abduct issues. That shows how U.S. and the Japan shares a lot of things overlapped in their national security interest. So I think we are going to see a lot of messages common from U.S. and Japan for the security matters, especially in the Pacific strategies, Quad, and other emerging security issues. So from U.S., that I think there's going to be a lot of pressure from the United States for Korea and Japan to cooperate on security matters with the United States.
Right. Meanwhile, Ms. Daniels, how do you assess Beijing's vaccine diplomacy?
I think that Beijing has done what it often does, which is to provide public goods around the region on a bilateral basis. that obviously opens it up to questions of whether or not it is doing so in order to exert some sort of influence. But the fact is that Beijing has been incredibly generous, at least on paper, when it comes to pledging and promising public goods. The U.S. through the mechanism of the Quad countries and the leadership level summit that was held earlier this month has also pledged to provide up to 1 billion vaccines to the region. And I think that is a demonstration that the U.S. can also provide public goods. And not only that it can do it on a multilateral and cooperative basis. And I think this is really important. This is a significant development for the region and for the U.S. role in the region. The fact is that this is not a zero-sum game. It's not really a contest between the United States and China to see who can provide more vaccines in the region. The whole region benefits, and both the U.S. and China benefit from having the region be as vaccinated as possible. And the U.S. being able to do this through its partnerships in the region shows an example of really effective and functional multilateralism. And that is what we are going to need to solve the problems of the 21st century, whether it's pandemic disease or climate change or reinvesting in international rules and international systems. So I think this is a very positive step forward, and that it shouldn't be seen solely in terms of great power competition, but should really be about how both countries can provide public goods to the region.
Right. Then perhaps on that positive note, we'll end today's session. All right, Ms. Daniels, thank you very much for your time. And Dr. Wu, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Right, the importance of in-person interactions has been accentuated amid COVID-19 restrictions on gatherings and movement. Hopefully, the global inoculation drive will allow a resumption of such exchanges in the near future. Thank you for watching.